People are convinced that Marvel used AI in this Avengers Doomsday poster, and honestly, I can kind of understand why. There are weird hands, wings that don't seem to behave consistently, shapes that almost melt into each other, all the things that we've spent the last few years learning to point at and immediately shout AI. But there's one fairly massive problem. None of that actually proves this was generated by AI, and I think that might be more interesting than the accusation itself. This is an official Avengers Doomsday poster showing Doctor Doom standing in front of this enormous aged tapestry, and almost immediately after it was released, people started zooming into the artwork behind him. Not Doom, not the composition, not whatever extremely healthy childhood memories Victor was apparently processing here. It was the tapestry itself. So rather than just saying AI or not AI, I wanted to look at this as an illustrator and ask, what are people actually seeing that makes this feel generated? And more importantly, are these things actually evidence? Now, the most obvious place to start is the anatomy. People pointed at this elongated finger on the central figure and some of the smaller hands that seem to disappear or merge into nearby forms. And yes, those are exactly the kind of errors we've become familiar with from AI generated imagery. Then there are the wings. Some appear relatively conventional, others become much harder to understand. Feather structures change, some shapes look almost forked, and in a few areas it becomes difficult to tell whether we're looking at a wing, fabric, cloud, or something else entirely. There are also places where forms seem to kind of blend together rather than meeting with a clean, deliberate boundary. Again, very AI looking. So if you showed me this cropped out of context and said, Sam, does this make you suspicious? Yeah, it does. But suspicion is not provenance. That distinction is really, really important, because right now we're basically trying to identify how an image was created by looking for things that feel visually wrong. And humans have been making weirdly visual things for years, for a long time. I mean, look at the visual language that Marvel was trying to imitate here. This isn't supposed to look like a photograph. It's an aged, decorative, almost religious piece of imagery inside Doom's environment. The figures are flattened, the scales have shifted, forms disappear into texture, the entire surface has been distressed until parts of the drawing are intentionally difficult to read. And that matters, because stylized art does not have to obey realistic anatomy. Art history is full of elongated limbs, strange perspective, and human bodies being distorted because the artist wanted the imagery to communicate something other than anatomical accuracy. Comic books do this constantly. If one unusually long finger is now proof of AI, half of art history and approximately 90% of superhero anatomy are about to have a very uncomfortable meeting. The question isn't, does something look weird? It's, is there evidence that the weirdness came from generative AI? Those are not the same question. And I also don't want to overcorrect here, because I've seen the opposite reaction too. It's stylized, so therefore, obviously, it isn't AI. We don't know that either. Generative AI is perfectly capable of producing fake paintings, tapestries, distressed textures, and deliberately looking old imagery. In fact, a highly textured style like this can potentially make generated inconsistencies harder to spot because ambiguity becomes part of the aesthetic. So yes, AI could have been involved. Maybe the tapestry began as a generated imagery. Maybe AI was used somewhere in the development process. Maybe it was entirely human-made. I don't know. And after looking for an actual source rather than just reading through comments, I couldn't find a public statement from Marvel explaining how this tapestry was created. The public poster listing I found credits BLT Communications with the poster design, but that doesn't tell us who created every individual element and asset or what tools were involved. So the most accurate answer right now is incredibly unsatisfying. We don't know. And that should be okay. But this is where I think the conversation becomes much more interesting for artists. AI hasn't just changed how images are made, it's changed how we look at images. 5 years ago, if you saw an unusually stretched hand in a stylized illustration, you might think, oh, interesting exaggeration, bad anatomy, strange artistic choice. Maybe the artist just messed up. But today, AI. We've effectively built this visual checklist. Bad fingers? AI. Weird text? AI. Asymmetry? AI. Something blending strangely? AI. Too smooth? AI. Too detailed? somehow also AI. And I don't understand why. There are absolutely reoccurring artifacts associated with generated imagery, but the danger is that we start treating imperfection itself as evidence that a human wasn't involved, which is almost backwards. I mean, I literally just made a video about wanting my own work to become rougher, stranger, and less perfectly polished. And now artists are working in an environment where making something unconventional can immediately create suspicion that they didn't make it at all. And that is a bizarre problem. So what would actually move this beyond speculation? Would it be the process, the source material, production, documentation, a statement from the artist or studio itself? Something that tells us where the image actually came from rather than asking us to reverse engineer authorship from a funny looking hand. Visual clues can absolutely justify asking questions, but it shouldn't automatically become the verdict, because otherwise we're doing something very strange. We're deciding whether somebody created an image based on whether we think they made the right mistakes. So, do I think parts of this Avengers Doomsday poster look like they could have involved AI? Yeah, sure. Especially some of the ambiguous anatomy and wing structures in the Tapestry. Would I confidently say that Marvel used generative AI based on this poster alone? No, there simply isn't enough evidence. And honestly, the biggest takeaway for me isn't whether this one tapestry was generated, it's what our reaction to it says about where art is now. We've become so accustomed to AI making strange mistakes that we've started to treat strange art as proof of AI. And those two things are not interchangeable. Looking weird tells you that an image looks weird. It does not tell you how that image was made. But I'm interested to know where you land on this. Look at the tapestry properly and tell me, AI, human-made, AI-assisted, or genuinely impossible to tell. Now, if you enjoy professional breakdowns of comic art, posters, and visual storytelling, please subscribe because I'm going to keep digging into this stuff whenever something interesting appears. And if you are an artist building a professional creative career, my book, The Profitable Artist, covers portfolios, positioning, pricing, and clients. And the link to that is in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching.